In the beginning, before the pyramids rose from the desert, before Rome ruled the Mediterranean, and before China built its Great Wall, there was Mesopotamia, a land where rivers gave birth to empires, where clay tablets whispered the first written words, and where humanity dared to dream of law, kingship, and gods. This is not just the story of Iraq. This is the story of civilization itself, a story of glory and devastation, invention and destruction, hope and despair. Tonight, we journey into the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, a land that shaped the world, and yet today struggles to survive its own shadows. Stay with us, because once you step into Mesopotamia, history itself will never look the same again. History. Long before the modern borders of Iraq were drawn, this land between two mighty rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, cradled the dawn of humanity's greatest leap, civilization. Here, around 10,000 years ago, scattered hunter-gatherer communities transformed into farmers, tilling the Fertile Crescent where soil was rich and water abundant. The ancient plains of Mesopotamia became a natural laboratory for human progress. Villages sprouted along the rivers, connected by irrigation canals carved with bare hands. Slowly, these villages grew into towns and towns into cities. By 4000 BCE, the world's first true urban centers were rising. Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, places that would later echo through time as humanity's first experiments with organized life. Mesopotamia was not just a region. It was an awakening, a spark of light in the long night of Prehistor. The Sumerians, a people whose origins remain shrouded in mystery, were among the first to harness the power of collective living. They constructed ziggurats, towering temples that reached skyward like stairways for the gods. At the heart of their cities, these structures stood as symbols of both divine devotion and earthly power. But the Sumerians gave the world more than monuments. Around 3200 BCE, they etched wedge-shaped marks onto wet clay tablets, the first known system of writing, cuneiform. Through these impressions, humanity began recording trade, law, and literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of storytelling, was born here, telling of kings, gods, and mankind's eternal quest for immortality. In Mesopotamia, history itself was invented not just in action, but in memory, preserved for millennia. As centuries passed, the cities of Mesopotamia grew into rival kingdoms, and rival kingdoms into empires. Sargon of Akkad in the 24th century BCE carved out the first true empire known to history, the Akkadian Empire. His armies marched across Mesopotamia, uniting city-states under a single banner, proving that power could stretch beyond walls and rivers. The empire rose, but like all things in this land, it also fell, succumbing to internal strife and external invaders. Yet even in collapse, Mesopotamia never ceased to reinvent itself. The Babylonians emerged, bringing with them Hammurabis, code the world's first comprehensive legal system. An eye for an eye declared the stones steely, not as vengeance, but as law, a groundbreaking vision that still echoes in the principles of justice today. From the ashes of one empire, another always rose. The Assyrians, fierce warriors and master tacticians, built one of the most formidable empires of the ancient world. With iron weapons and advanced siege machines, they conquered lands stretching from Egypt to Persia. Nineveh, their great capital, became a center of learning, boasting libraries that preserved thousands of cuneiform tablets. Yet their cruelty and conquest bred resentment, and the empire eventually crumbled under the weight of rebellion and invasion. Still, Mesopotamia remained, a canvas upon which humanity painted new chapters of power, science, and faith. The Neo-Babylonian Empire revived the region's glory, gifting the world the legendary Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Said to rise like green terraces in the desert, But Mesopotamia's destiny was never to remain in the hands of one people alone. Conquerors came like waves upon its fertile soil. Persians under Cyrus the Great absorbed Babylon into their vast dominion. Alexander the Great marched through, dreaming of uniting East and West, leaving behind cities and legends. Romans, Parthians, and later the Islamic caliphates all left their mark on this land between rivers. Mesopotamia became not only the birthplace of civilization but also its eternal crossroads, a place where ideas, religions, and empires collided. From cuneiform tablets to Quranic scholars, from ziggurats to mosques, Iraq's soil has carried the footsteps of those who shaped the human story. It was here, in this cradle, that the first chapters of civilization were written, and where new chapters of struggle would continue for thousands of years. By the first millennium BCE, Mesopotamia had become not just the center of empires, but also the birthplace of some of humanity's deepest spiritual and intellectual traditions. It was here that the idea of astrology was first charted. As priests gazed at the same stars we see today, believing the heavens whispered messages about kings, wars, and harvests, mathematics and astronomy flourished. Babylonian scholars calculated planetary movements with astonishing precision, laying groundwork that would later guide Greek and Islamic scientists. The measurement of time, dividing hours, minutes, and seconds into 60 was not Roman, not European, but Mesopotamian. Even as kingdoms rose and fell, the intellectual pulse of this land never dimmed. Beneath the weight of conquest, Mesopotamia continued gifting humanity tools to navigate both earth and sky. The Babylonians, in their grandeur, established Babylon as one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. Its walls, so wide that chariots could race upon them, symbolized strength and pride. At its center stood the great temple of Marduk, chief deity of Babylon, surrounded by towering structures that dazzled travelers. Legends tell of the hanging gardens, lush terraces of greenery built by King Nebuchadnezzar II, a wonder that defied the desert's harshness. Whether myth or reality, the gardens became a symbol of Mesopotamian ambition to defy nature itself in pursuit of beauty and order. Yet beyond its splendor, Babylon was also a city of laws, markets, and diverse peoples, where cultures from across the ancient world converged, traded, and mingled under the watch of mighty kings. But as history teaches us, glory is fragile. In 539 BCE, Babylon fell to Cyrus the Great of Persia, a conquest remembered not only for its swiftness, but for its mercy. Cyrus allowed conquered peoples, including the Jews exiled in Babylon, to return to their homelands. This act of tolerance resonated through centuries, casting Persia as not merely a conqueror, but a liberator in the eyes of many. Yet, Mesopotamia under Persian rule remained a land of immense wealth, a bridge between East and West in the vast Achaemenid Empire. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates still nourished fields of grain, while caravan routes carried goods and ideas. Across the empire's arteries, Mesopotamia's role as the world's beating heart continued, even as the names of its rulers changed. The march of history brought Alexander the Great to Mesopotamia in 331 BCE, his fateful battle against Darius III of Persia at Gaugamela, near present-day Mosul, became one of the most decisive victories in world history. With this triumph, Alexander seized Babylon, entering the city not as a destroyer but as a guest of its grandeur. For a brief moment, Babylon became the capital of the world, a stage where East met West, Greek met Persian, and where Alexander envisioned a universal empire. But destiny had other plans. Only a few years later, in 323 BCE, Alexander would die in Babylon itself, at the age of 32, his dream of unity left incomplete. Mesopotamia, once again, absorbed the ambitions of conquerors, outlasting even the greatest of them in the centuries that followed. Mesopotamia passed from one empire to another. The Seleucids, the Parthians, the Romans, and later, the mighty Sassanids of Persia. Each left behind traces of their culture, from Hellenistic theaters to Persian fire temples, blending with the region's already deep and diverse heritage. Yet through all these shifts, the rivers remained the constant lifeblood of the land. Farmers still bent their backs over fertile soil. Merchants still bartered in bustling markets. Priests still looked to the stars for meaning. The world's political centers shifted from empire to empire. But Mesopotamia never lost its place as humanity's sacred cradle. It had witnessed the birth of writing, the rise of law, the building of cities, the clash of empires, and the birth of ideas that would shape civilizations forever. Still, its story was far from over, for a new chapter was about to dawn, one that would forever redefine both Mesopotamia and the world. The 7th century brought a transformation more profound than any empire before it: the rise of Islam. In 637 CE, Muslim armies captured Ctesiphon, the ancient Persian capital near present-day Baghdad, forever altering the destiny of Mesopotamia. With the fall of the Sassanids, this land became a vital heart of the Islamic Caliphate. A century later, the Abbasid dynasty rose to power, establishing Baghdad as its glittering capital in 762 CE. Baghdad was not merely a city. It was a symbol of human brilliance. Known as the City of Peace, it became the largest and most advanced metropolis of its time, with palaces, gardens, and markets that rivaled anything on earth. More importantly, it became a beacon of knowledge. The Abbasids established the House of Wisdom, where scholars from every corner of the known world gathered: Persians, Arabs, Greeks, Jews, and Christians, to translate, preserve, and expand upon the intellectual treasures of humanity. During the Islamic Golden Age, Baghdad became the intellectual capital of the world. Here, scholars invented algebra, advanced medicine, charted the stars, and translated the works of Aristotle and Plato into Arabic, ensuring their survival into the Renaissance. Great minds like Al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra, Al-Razi, a pioneering physician, and Al-Biruni, a brilliant astronomer, walked the streets of Baghdad. Libraries held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts covering philosophy, science, literature, and theology. The Tigris River carried not just goods, but ideas that would ripple across continents. For centuries, Mesopotamia, now Iraq, once again stood at the forefront of human achievement, carrying the torch of civilization from antiquity into the medieval world. It was a golden light that illuminated Europe during its dark ages, a reminder that knowledge is the most enduring empire of all. But as with every golden age, shadows followed. In 1258, the Mongols, under Hulagu Khan, descended upon Baghdad with fury. The once proud capital, jewel of the Islamic world, was reduced to ashes in a massacre so devastating it shocked even the conquerors. Hundreds of thousands were slaughtered, and the legendary libraries of Baghdad containing centuries of wisdom were thrown into the Tigris. Chroniclers wrote that the river ran black with ink and red with blood. This catastrophe marked one of the darkest moments in world history, though the Mongols would eventually convert to Islam and integrate into the region. The brilliance of the Abbasid Golden Age never truly returned. The cradle of civilization was once again a battlefield of empires, each wave of invaders leaving scars upon its soil and people. In the centuries that followed, Mesopotamia was ruled by various powers: the Timurids, the Safavids, and ultimately the Ottomans. Under Ottoman control, which lasted for nearly 4 centuries, the region became a neglected province, far removed from the glories of its past. Baghdad remained important as a provincial capital, but it lacked the splendor and influence it once commanded. The fertile lands were still cultivated, bazaars still thrived, and mosques rose to the heavens. Yet the region was now a frontier rather than a center. The Ottoman era was marked by both cultural blending and political stagnation, leaving Iraq vulnerable to the ambitions of rising European powers in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The land that had once invented civilization itself now seemed trapped under the weight of its history, waiting for a new dawn. That dawn came violently in the 20th century, with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I. Mesopotamia, now called Iraq, was carved into modern borders by foreign powers, particularly Britain, under the infamous Sykes-Picot Agreement. In 1932, Iraq gained formal independence, but its path was riddled with coups, monarchies, revolutions, and foreign interventions. Oil was discovered, transforming Iraq into a prize coveted by global powers, yet also a curse that fueled dictatorship, corruption, and war. The echoes of ancient Mesopotamia, its inventions, empires, and philosophies still lingered in the Iraqi soul. But the modern nation would face new struggles unlike any before. Iraq, the heir to the cradle of civilization, now stood at the crossroads of modern history, torn between glory and tragedy, between its ancient legacy and its uncertain future. Culture. When we speak of Mesopotamia, we do not only speak of empires and wars, we speak of culture, the heartbeat of civilization that pulsed in temples, marketplaces, and homes. It was here that humanity first gave shape to its voice, chiseling symbols into clay to create cuneiform, the world's earliest known writing system. In those wedge-shaped marks, people recorded not only laws and trade, but poetry, prayers, and personal letters. Language in Mesopotamia was not static. It evolved from Sumerian to Akkadian, from Babylonian to Aramaic, and eventually Arabic, weaving a tapestry of words that carried the thoughts of countless generations. Today, in Iraq, Arabic and Kurdish dominate, yet echoes of those ancient tongues remain in place names, traditions, and even in the rhythm of storytelling. Language is more than communication here. It is the thread that ties modern Iraqis to their Sumerian ancestors who once wrote of gods, kings, and the mysteries of the human heart. Literature, too, was born in this soil. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written nearly 4,000 years ago, is not just the first epic of humanity, but also one of its most profound. It tells of friendship, loss, and the search for immortality. Themes as alive today as they were in the days of Uruk. This ancient poem continues to inspire writers and philosophers around the world, proving that the voice of Mesopotamia still speaks across millennia. In medieval Baghdad, literature blossomed again under the Abbasids, where poets like Al-Mutanabbi gave Arabic verse its sharp edge and enduring beauty. Coffee houses in Baghdad became gathering places for reciting poetry, debating philosophy, and sharing stories that echoed the ancient tradition of oral storytelling. Even in modern Iraq, despite war and turmoil, poets and writers have continued to capture the struggles and hopes of their people, carrying forward a tradition that began in clay tablets beneath the Mesopotamian sun. Music has always been central to Mesopotamian culture. Ancient instruments, harps, lyres, and drums accompanied rituals and celebrations, echoing across temple courtyards. Archaeologists have discovered musical notations on clay tablets, suggesting that Mesopotamians developed structured scales thousands of years before Mozart or Bach. This legacy never disappeared. Iraqi music today is rich with makam, a traditional system of melody and improvisation that carries deep emotional resonance. Performed with instruments like the oud, santur, and ney, makam is both haunting and uplifting, reflecting the joys and sorrows of a land that has endured so much. In Baghdad, makam is more than performance. It is memory, history, and identity, expressed in sound. Through music, Iraqis connect with their ancestors, finding comfort in melodies that have outlasted empires. Architecture, too, speaks the language of continuity. In ancient Mesopotamia, ziggurats rose as stairways to the heavens, symbols of humanity's desire to reach the divine. The ruins of yours, ziggurats, still tower silently in southern Iraq, whispering of an age when gods were believed to dwell. Above, Islamic architecture later added its own brilliance, minarets, and intricate calligraphy that adorned mosques across Baghdad, Najaf, and Karbala. The Abbasids perfected the art of geometry and symmetry, building mosques and palaces that blended function with beauty. Even today, the shrines of Imam Ali in Najaf and Imam Hussein in Karbala stand as sacred masterpieces, drawing millions of pilgrims. In Iraqi homes, architecture is more intimate, courtyards designed for family gatherings. Intricate wooden latticework called mashrabia, shading the windows, blending privacy with beauty. In every brick, Iraq tells its cultural story. From the mud temples of Sumer to the golden domes of Islam, but perhaps nothing captures the essence of Iraqi culture more than its resilience, the ability to preserve traditions in the face of hardship. Wars, invasions, and sanctions have scarred the nation. Yet weddings still fill the air with music. Poets still gather to share verses, and storytellers still enchant audiences in cafes. From the rural villages of the Marsh Arabs in the south, who build floating houses of reeds, to the Kurdish mountains where folk dances light up festivals, Iraq is a mosaic of cultures bound by shared history. Ancient Mesopotamian rituals of harvest and renewal survive in modern festivals. The sacred rituals of Shia and Sunni Islam define the spiritual calendar. And hospitality remains a sacred duty, with tea, coffee, and bread always ready for a guest. Culture in Mesopotamia is not an artifact locked in museums. It is living, breathing, and enduring, a flame carried from the dawn of civilization into the present day. Festivals in Iraq have always been more than moments of celebration. They are expressions of survival, continuity, and identity. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Akitu festival marked the new year. Celebrated in Babylon with rituals that symbolized the renewal of life and the divine blessing of kingship. Today, echoes of Akitu can be felt in Nowruz, the Persian and Kurdish New Year, celebrated on the spring equinox with bonfires, music, and dancing, especially in northern Iraq. Islamic festivals also shape the cultural calendar. Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha bring families together with feasts and prayers. Ashura, deeply sacred for Shia Muslims, commemorates the martyrdom of Imam Hussein in Karbala, drawing millions of pilgrims from across the world. In one of the largest annual gatherings on earth, these festivals are not just rituals, but lifelines. Moments when Iraqis, despite hardship, come together to remember who they are and to keep alive traditions that span thousands of years. Cuisine, perhaps more than anything, reflects the fusion of Mesopotamia's heritage. Ancient clay tablets reveal recipes from nearly 4,000 years ago, making Iraqi cuisine one of the oldest documented in the world. Today, the flavors of Iraq carry both history and hospitality. Dishes like maskouf, the iconic grilled river fish, seasoned with tamarind and spices, recall the bounty of the Tigris and Euphrates. Klika, a date-filled pastry, is a sweet echo of the region's ancient love for dates, once called the bread of the desert. Rich stews like keema and rice dishes like biryani show Ottoman and Persian influences, while Kurdish cuisine adds mountain herbs and hearty breads. Food in Iraq is more than nourishment. It is a ritual of welcome. Guests are greeted with tea, brewed, strong, and sweet, poured into small glasses that never seem too empty, symbolizing generosity that even poverty cannot extinguish. The visual arts of Iraq are deeply rooted in both ancient and Islamic traditions. From the carved reliefs of Assyrian palaces showing kings, battles, and winged guardians, to the beautiful calligraphy and arabesque designs of Abbasid mosques, art in Mesopotamia has always been a bridge between the earthly and the divine. In Modern times, Iraqi artists such as Juad Salim worked to revive Mesopotamian themes, blending ancient motifs with modern forms. His Monument of Freedom in Baghdad remains a symbol of national identity, capturing both sorrow and hope in sculpted bronze. Traditional crafts, weaving carpets, engraving copper, and making delicate ceramics continue to thrive in workshops passed down through generations. These crafts, once traded along the Silk Road, remain threads in the cultural fabric of Treviso, Iraq. Linking present artisans with ancestors who worked by firelight thousands of years ago. Dance and performance also carry cultural weight. In Kurdish regions, group dances called Debisi or Halpark bring communities together during weddings and festivals, with lines of dancers moving rhythmically to the beat of drums. In the south, the music of the marsh Arabs is joined by reed instruments that echo the waterways where their homes float. Storytelling lives on through the Hakawati, the traditional storyteller who gathers people in cafes to share tales, both ancient and modern. Theater in Iraq, especially in Baghdad, thrived in the 20th century, blending Western styles with Arabic traditions, though war and sanctions have made survival difficult. Yet even today, Iraqi performers use art as resistance, a reminder that creativity cannot be silenced even in times of destruction. In every rhythm, movement, and story, Iraq keeps its cultural heartbeat alive. Perhaps the most enduring tradition of Iraq is hospitality. To be welcomed into an Iraqi home is to experience a ritual as old as Mesopotamia itself. Guests are greeted with the offering of bread and salt, symbols of trust and loyalty. Coffee is prepared with ceremony, poured from ornate pots into small cups, its bitterness softened by the warmth of human connection. In rural villages, entire sheep may be roasted to honor visitors, no matter how scarce resources may be. Hospitality is not measured by wealth, but by generosity, a value passed down since the days when caravan routes crossed Mesopotamia and strangers relied on one another for survival. Even today, amidst war and displacement, Iraqis open their doors to guests, embodying the ancient saying, "The guest is a gift from God." This tradition, carried from Sumer to Baghdad, proves that culture is not just monuments or art, but the living spirit of its people. Religion in Mesopotamia has always been a powerful force. In ancient times, the Sumerians and Babylonians worshipped many gods, Anu, Enel, Inanna, Marduk, each tied to natural forces and human destiny. Ziggurats rose as temples bridging earth and heaven, where priests mediated between mortals and the divine. With the arrival of Islam in the 7th century, Iraq became a spiritual center for the new faith. Cities like Najaf and Karbala became sacred places for Shia Islam, holding the shrines of Imam Ali and Imam Hussein, visited by millions every year. For Sunnis, Baghdad was once a beacon of Islamic learning under the Abbasids, producing scholars whose works shaped theology and law. Today, Iraq remains a mosaic of faiths, Muslim, Christian, Yazidi, and Mandaean, reflecting its ancient role as a crossroads of belief. Spirituality in Iraq extends beyond religion. It is tied to memory and sacrifice. The annual Arbaleen pilgrimage, where millions of Shia Muslims walk to Karbala, is not only a religious duty, but also a cultural sign of resilience. For Yazidis, in northern Iraq, festivals like the Feast of the Assembly at Lalish preserve traditions thousands of years old. Even among secular Iraqis, spirituality is expressed through respect for ancestors, sacred spaces, and the belief that suffering carries meaning. This sense of the sacred lives in Iraq's landscape. From the ruins of Ur in Babylon to the holy shrines glowing beneath golden domes, it feels as though every stone, river, and city carries a soul. Holding centuries of human devotion and sacrifice, family life lies at the heart of Iraqi culture, providing stability through decades of turmoil. Traditionally, families are large and multi-generational, with grandparents, parents, and children living under one roof. Respect for elders is vital, and decisions are often made together, reflecting values of unity and care. Weddings are vibrant celebrations filled with song, dance, and rich feasts, where entire communities join in. Even in times of war and displacement, families strive to stay together, forming the strongest safety net when institutions fail. The warmth of family bonds in Iraq is not just cultural but essential for survival, a reminder that while empires fall and borders change, the family remains. Education, once a source of pride during Iraq's modern era, reflects both ambition and tragedy. In ancient Mesopotamia, schools called edebas trained scribes to master cuneiform, making Iraq the first place where children sat in classrooms to learn. During the Abbasid Golden Age, Baghdad became the intellectual capital of the world, where scholars studied science, philosophy, and literature. In the 20th century, Iraq had one of the best education systems in the Arab world, with universities in Baghdad and Mosul attracting students from across the region. Yet decades of dictatorship, war, and sanctions damaged this legacy, leaving schools underfunded and children without opportunities. Still, Iraqis see education as a cultural treasure, a path to reclaiming dignity and progress. Every book opened in Baghdad today echoes clay tablets written in years thousands of years ago. What truly defines Iraqi culture is its resilience, the power to endure tragedy and still preserve identity. Centuries of invasion, colonization, and conflict could have erased traditions, yet Iraq has always adapted rather than surrendered. Ancient rituals survive in modern festivals. Forgotten languages live on in proverbs. Ancestral music flows in Makkah melodies, and art blooms even in refugee camps. To be Iraqi is to carry the weight of Mesopotamia, to live in the land where civilization began, where knowledge thrived, and where faith and family remain anchors through storm after storm. Culture in Iraq is not a relic of the past, but a living testament to humanity's strength. Temples served not only as spiritual centers, but also as economic ones, storing harvests and redistributing resources. Priests became administrators, managing everything from land leases to labor rations, ensuring the smooth function of society. Through these systems, Mesopotamia pioneered the earliest forms of organized economic governance, laying the foundations for what would one day become banking, taxation, and trade law. Civilization's prosperity was not accidental. It was managed, documented, and preserved in clay. The wealth generated by agriculture and trade fueled monumental architecture and the rise of cities. Ziggurats and palaces did not emerge from thin air. They were the products of an economy capable of mobilizing labor and resources on an unprecedented scale. Workers were paid in rations of grain and beer. Artisans were commissioned to craft. Statues and tools and merchants ensured that building materials flowed into the cities from across the region. This interwoven economy allowed rulers to project both political power and divine authority, cementing their legacies in bricks that have survived for millennia. The grandeur of Mesopotamian cities was therefore not just political or spiritual, but economic proof that prosperity and labor, carefully organized, could transform mud and red into wonders of the ancient world. Yet the Mesopotamian economy was also fragile, forever tied to the rhythms of the rivers. Floods could destroy crops as easily as they nourished them, and prolonged droughts could lead to famine. Competition for fertile land often sparked conflict between city-states, while over-irrigation caused salinization that eventually reduced soil productivity. Despite these challenges, the ingenuity of Mesopotamian farmers kept cities thriving. For centuries, adapting techniques and expanding irrigation systems. The economy of ancient Mesopotamia was not one of endless growth, but of balance, a delicate dance between human ambition and the forces of nature. It was here, in this balance, that humanity first learned the true cost of prosperity, the necessity of stewardship, cooperation, and foresight. These lessons, carved into clay thousands of years ago, remain strikingly relevant for Iraq today, where the rivers still hold both promise and peril. The dawn of the 20th century brought with it a seismic transformation in Iraq's economy. For millennia, the land had thrived on agriculture, but in 1927, a gusher erupted at Baba Gurgur near Kirkuk, one of the largest oil fields in the world. In an instant, the foundation of Iraq's economy shifted. Oil was no longer just a resource, buried beneath the soil. It became the liquid gold that would define the nation's future. Foreign powers, particularly Britain, swiftly positioned themselves to control the new resource, ensuring that Iraq's oil wealth would first enrich others before its own people. Pipelines stretched across deserts and mountains to Mediterranean ports, carrying with them both prosperity and dependency. Oil promised riches beyond imagination, but it also brought foreign interference, political tension, and a new kind of vulnerability that Iraq had never faced before. By the mid-20th century, as Iraq gained greater independence from colonial influence, oil revenues began to flow more directly into the national treasury. The monarchy, though fragile, used oil wealth to modernize infrastructure, building roads, bridges, schools, and hospitals. Baghdad transformed into a city of promise, where modern architecture rose alongside ancient ruins. For a time, Iraq seemed poised to step into a golden era, blending its deep historical roots with the opportunities of modern industry. Yet beneath the surface, inequities festered. The wealth of oil was not equally distributed, and rural farmers, still the backbone of the nation, often remained impoverished, disconnected from the prosperity blossoming in the capital. The disparity between rich and poor widened, planting seeds of resentment that would later erupt into revolution. The Revolution of 1958, which overthrew the monarchy, marked another turning point in Iraq's economic story. The new republic sought to reclaim full sovereignty over its natural resources, nationalizing oil assets and using revenue to finance ambitious development projects. Under the Ba'athist regime, particularly during the rule of Saddam Hussein, Iraq embarked on a program of rapid modernization. The government poured billions into education, healthcare, electrification, and infrastructure. Illiteracy rates plummeted, medical care became more accessible, and Baghdad emerged as a modern Arab capital. For many Iraqis, these decades represented a time when oil wealth translated into tangible improvements in daily life. Iraq, once an agrarian society, now stood as one of the most advanced economies in the region, its future seemingly secured by the endless flow of petroleum. But prosperity came with a cost. The Iraqi economy grew dangerously dependent on oil, sidelining agriculture and other industries that had sustained the land for thousands of years. By the late 1970s, oil accounted for more than 95% of Iraq's export earnings, tying the nation's fate entirely to global oil markets. When prices soared, Iraq flourished. When they crashed, so too did government revenue. This dependency was further tested by war. The 8-year Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s drained the nation's treasury, forcing Baghdad to borrow billions, mortgaging its future. What had been an era of modernization quickly spiraled into one of debt, destruction, and hardship. The very resource that had promised Iraq prosperity now financed endless conflict, turning oil from a blessing into a double-edged sword by the close of the 20th century. Iraq's economic miracle had collapsed under the weight of sanctions, wars, and authoritarian rule. The Gulf War of 1991 and subsequent United Nations sanctions devastated the economy, reducing once prosperous cities to shadows of their former selves. Inflation skyrocketed, basic goods became scarce, and poverty spread across the population. The oil for food program provided minimal relief, but it could not undo the decades of damage. Iraq, once the cradle of agriculture and later an oil-powered powerhouse, had fallen into ruin, its economy shackled by both external pressures and internal mismanagement. The contrast was heartbreaking. A land that had given the world civilization now struggled to provide its own children with bread. The lesson was bitter and clear. Wealth without stability and resources without vision could not guarantee prosperity. The year 2003 marked a cataclysmic rupture in Iraq's economic story. The U.S.-led invasion toppled Saddam Hussein's regime, dismantled the state, and unleashed chaos across every aspect of national life. For Iraq's economy, it was both a destruction and a rebirth. Entire ministries were dissolved, industries collapsed, and infrastructure was bombed into rubble. At the same time, the promise of reconstruction glimmered on the horizon. Backed by billions of dollars in international aid and the immense potential of Iraq's oil reserves. Yet the early years of occupation were defined not by growth, but by instability. Looting stripped government buildings bare. Corruption seeped into reconstruction projects, and sectarian violence tore through communities. For ordinary Iraqis, daily survival became the economy, as electricity outages, fuel shortages, and unemployment dominated life. Despite the chaos, Iraq's oil remained the lifeline of its economy. The new Iraqi government, with U.S. support, quickly restructured the oil sector, hoping to restore production and exports. By the mid-2000s, oil revenues once again filled the national budget, accounting for nearly 90% of government income. Yet this dependence created fragility. Instead of diversifying industries, Iraq doubled down on petroleum, repeating the same vulnerabilities that had plagued its past. Billions of dollars flowed into state coffers, but much of it vanished through corruption, inefficiency, or outright theft. Iraqis often joked bitterly that their country was one of the richest in resources, but one of the poorest in living standards. A paradox of wealth without development. The dream of reconstruction gave way to the reality of squandered opportunity. The rise of sectarian militias and the insurgency further strangled economic progress. As violence surged, foreign investors fled, factories closed, and farmers abandoned their fields. The once thriving agricultural heartland of Mesopotamia struggled under neglect and water mismanagement, leaving Iraq increasingly reliant on imported food. Meanwhile, infrastructure projects often stalled or failed entirely. Roads remained cratered, power plants unfinished, and hospitals underfunded. Every attempt to rebuild was undercut by insecurity, making progress fragile and temporary. 4. The average Iraqi promises of prosperity clashed with the grim reality of empty shelves, unreliable electricity, and scarce job opportunities. Iraq's economy, though rich on paper, felt hollow in practice, a ghost of its potential. Then came another blow: the rise of ISIS in 2014. The terrorist group seized vast territories, including oil fields, siphoning off revenues, and further crippling Iraq's fragile economy. Billions of dollars were diverted to military campaigns to retake lost cities, while millions of Iraqis were displaced, requiring emergency aid and housing. Reconstruction costs soared, stretching the government's already strained finances. And yet, amid the ashes of war, resilience persisted. Iraqi forces, supported by international allies, eventually reclaimed territory. And the oil sector, once again, limped back into production. Still, the damage was deep. Entire cities, like Mosul, required rebuilding from the ground up, demanding not only money, but decades of work. The struggle for economic recovery had become as much a battle against corruption and mismanagement as it was against war itself. By the early 2020s, Iraq's economy stood at a crossroads. Oil production reached record levels, yet diversification remained elusive. Corruption ranked among the worst in the world, draining resources from education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Unemployment, particularly among youth, fueled discontent and mass protests as Iraqis demanded a government that could deliver more than promises. Global oil price fluctuations exposed the nation's vulnerability, with crises erupting whenever prices dipped. And yet, hope persisted. Iraq's young population, its fertile land, and its strategic position in the Middle East offered opportunities for renewal. The nation could harness its oil wealth responsibly, invest in its people, and heal its divisions. Iraq could one day reclaim the prosperity its history so often promised. But if not, the cradle of civilization risked remaining trapped in cycles of wealth and ruin, a story as old as Mesopotamia itself. Current situation: in the aftermath of Saddam Hussein's fall in 2003, Iraq stood at a crossroads, its centuries of history converging into a single fragile moment. For the first time in generations, the nation had the chance to build a democratic system, yet it was a democracy born in the ruins of war, imposed under foreign occupation, and plagued by deep mistrust. Coalition forces dissolved the Iraqi army and Ba'ath Party institutions, creating a vacuum of power that was quickly filled by militias and sectarian leaders. The dream of liberty was overshadowed by chaos as Iraq's streets echoed with explosions, kidnappings, and the cries of families torn apart by sectarian cleansing. The new Iraq was not united. It was fractured, divided, and learning the painful cost of rebuilding governance from ashes. Elections brought the appearance of progress. But democracy in Iraq proved fragile. Voter turnout was high in the early years, as Iraqis embraced their newfound political voice, dipping their fingers in purple ink as a symbol of defiance and hope. Yet beneath the surface, the system was shaped by sectarianism. Political parties emerged along ethnic and religious lines: Shia, Sunni, Kurdish. Instead of uniting the country, politics deepened the divisions, often rewarding loyalty to sect over loyalty to nation. Governments were built on fragile coalitions that collapsed as quickly as they formed, paralyzing decision-making. To Iraqis, politics became synonymous with corruption, inefficiency, and self-interest, far removed from the lives of ordinary citizens still struggling for basic services. Corruption, more than any bomb or bullet, became Iraq's most destructive enemy. Billions of dollars in oil revenue disappeared into the pockets of officials, contractors, and middlemen, leaving hospitals understaffed, schools crumbling, and power grids failing. Transparency International consistently ranked Iraq among the most corrupt nations in the world. For ordinary Iraqis, corruption wasn't an abstract issue. It was the daily experience of paying bribes for healthcare, watching stalled construction projects rust in the sun, or living without reliable electricity despite billions spent on power plants. As one Iraqi protester once said, "It is not poverty that kills us. It is corruption." The promise of democracy was turning bitter. This disillusionment exploded into mass protests, beginning in 2015 and intensifying in 2019. Tens of thousands of Iraqis, especially the youth, flooded the streets of Baghdad, Basra, and Najaf. They weren't demanding more elections or partisan power. They were demanding dignity, jobs, and an end to corruption. For the first time in decades, the protests cut across sectarian lines, uniting Shia and Sunni voices against a broken system. Security forces responded with bullets, tear gas, and curfews, but the protests persisted, shaking the political elite. The movement revealed a deeper truth. Iraq's future would not be shaped by militias or foreign powers alone, but by the will of its young, restless generation. Today, Iraq's political scene remains caught between hope and stagnation. Prime ministers rise and fall under pressure, often lasting only months before being forced out by rival factions or public anger. The parliament remains gridlocked, torn between competing sectarian interests. While powerful militias, some loyal to Iran, others to nationalist leaders, exert influence that rivals the state itself. And yet, beneath the instability lies a resilience. Iraqis continue to vote, to protest, and to demand a better future. The nation's politics may seem chaotic, but within that chaos lies the seed of something new. A generation determined not to let the cradle of civilization remain shackled by corruption and division forever. The road is uncertain, but the struggle continues, a testament to the enduring spirit of Iraq to understand Iraq's place in today's world. One must first recognize that the nation is more than its borders. It is a crossroads of empires, a pivot of power, and a prize that regional and global actors cannot ignore. Since 2003, Iraq has been caught in a constant tug-of war between competing influences. The United States, which toppled Saddam Hussein and sought to shape a democratic ally. Iran, which sees Iraq as both a buffer and a sphere of influence. And neighboring Arab states, wary of instability spilling across borders. Iraq is not merely a state navigating its own path. It is a battlefield of interests, a chessboard, where every move reverberates across the Middle East. Iran's influence runs deepest through networks of Shia militias, collectively known as the Popular Mobilization Forces (PMF. Tehran has secured powerful leverage inside Iraq. These militias, originally mobilized to fight ISIS, remain heavily armed and politically entrenched, often answering more to commanders in Tehran than Baghdad. Their presence grants Iran enormous sway over Iraq's domestic policies, from security to energy. Yet this dependency is also resented by many Iraqis who see their sovereignty compromised. The killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani and PMF commander Abu Mahdi al-Khamhandis by a U.S. drone strike in Baghdad in 2020 exposed the precarious balance. Iraq had become a front line in the U.S.-Iran rivalry, a stage where foreign powers settled their scores. The United States, though no longer an occupying force, maintains a significant presence in Iraq. American troops, officially advisors and trainers, continue to support Iraqi forces against remnants of ISIS. Washington also exerts pressure on Baghdad to distance itself from Tehran, pushing for economic reforms and energy independence. But the U.S. is not viewed as a benevolent protector. For many Iraqis, America is still the architect of their suffering, blamed for dismantling the state and unleashing chaos. This dual perception, as both necessary partner and resented intruder, defines Iraq's uneasy relationship with Washington. It is a relationship built on distrust, yet bound by mutual necessity. Beyond Iran and the United States, Iraq's Arab neighbors have sought to re-engage. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the Gulf states have extended economic partnerships and diplomatic initiatives, seeing Iraq as a potential bridge between the Arab world and Iran, or as a market for investment. In reconstruction, Turkey, meanwhile, has its own ambitions, securing trade routes, accessing Iraq's energy, and battling Kurdish insurgents along the northern frontier. This web of competing agendas leaves Iraq both vulnerable and strategically vital. Every regional power wants a stake in its future, but few prioritize Iraq's sovereignty above their own interests. Yet in this storm of rivalries, Iraq itself is not powerless. Leaders in Baghdad, though constrained, have begun to position the country as a mediator rather than a victim. Recent years have seen Iraq host talks between Iran and Saudi Arabia, marking the first steps toward reconciliation in a region fractured by proxy wars. For a nation scarred by decades of conflict, this role of peacemaker is both symbolic and strategic, a way to reclaim dignity on the world stage. Iraq's future may still be clouded by militias and foreign influence, but its potential to become a stabilizing bridge rather than a battleground offers a glimmer of hope for a country long defined by its tragedies. For ordinary Iraqis, Geopolitics is only the backdrop. The true struggle is daily survival. In Baghdad, Basra, Mosul, and countless villages across the nation, families wrestle with unreliable electricity, crumbling infrastructure, unemployment, and the lingering trauma of decades of war. Power cuts in the sweltering summer heat. Water shortages along the once mighty Tigris and Euphrates, and inadequate healthcare turn everyday life into a test of endurance. Iraqis are a people accustomed to hardship, yet their resilience is tested each time promises of reform dissolve into corruption and inefficiency. The frustration is not only about poverty, it is about dignity, about a yearning for leaders who place the people above their own gain. This yearning came alive in 2019, when Iraq witnessed one of the most powerful grassroots movements in its modern history. Young Iraqis, many of them born after the 2003 invasion, poured into the streets demanding jobs, justice, and an end to corruption. They were not divided by sect or tribe. They were united by a common exhaustion with a system that had failed. These protests, centered in Baghdad's Tahrir Square, shook the political order. Though met with brutal crackdowns and tragic loss of life, they revealed a new generation unwilling to be silenced. Iraq's youth, more than half the population, are no longer content to inherit the wounds of the past. They want to shape their own future. The struggle, however, is not only political, but environmental. Climate change has hit Iraq with unforgiving force. Droughts, desertification, and rising temperatures threaten agriculture and displace rural communities. Once called the land between two rivers, Iraq now watches those rivers shrink under the strain of upstream dams and mismanagement. Dust storms darken the skies, salt water seeps into the farmlands of Basra, and fishermen find their catches dwindling. The environmental crisis is a silent war, less visible than bombings and militias, but no less devastating to the fabric of the nation. And yet, even here, local communities organize, planting trees, restoring irrigation, and calling for water. Writes on the international stage, despite these immense challenges, Iraq is not a land of despair alone. From musicians in Baghdad reviving traditional maqam melodies, to young entrepreneurs launching startups in Erbil, to women breaking barriers. In politics and academia, Iraq pulses with a quiet defiance. It is a defiance born from thousands of years of survival, from Babylon to Baghdad, from empire to occupation. The nation's cultural soul, though scarred, refuses to die. The same land that gave the world its first written words still produces poets, filmmakers, and thinkers who envision a tomorrow not chained to yesterday's bloodshed. And so, the story of Iraq, ancient Mesopotamia, cradle of civilization, continues. It is a story of rivers and ruins, of empires and invasions, of wounds and resilience. The past has weighed heavily, but the future remains unwritten. If Iraq can overcome corruption, reclaim its resources, empower its youth, and rise as a bridge between worlds rather than a battleground, it may yet fulfill the promise carried by its soil since the dawn of time. For when you walk through Baghdad's streets or gaze upon the ruins of your city, you feel it, history's pulse, beating not only with sorrow, but with possibility. Iraq is not only where civilization began, it may also be where humanity proves it can endure, rebuild, and begin again. Legacy of Mesopotamia. In the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, humanity took its first trembling steps toward what we call civilization. Before this land was carved by rivers and shaped by kings, humanity lived as wanderers, gathering, hunting, and surviving. But here, between the Tigris and Euphrates, something extraordinary happened. People settled. They tilled the soil, planted barley, harvested wheat, and created cities that defied the wilderness. Uruk, Eridu, Lagashides were not just places, they were the first beating hearts of organized human life. And in this crucible of invention, the very foundations of our modern world were born. It was in Mesopotamia that humans first learned to write, to record, to govern, and to dream beyond survival. The invention of writing cuneiform was more than symbols pressed into clay tablets. It was the first attempt of human beings to trap memory, to freeze thought, and to ensure that the voice of the present could echo into the future. Farmers recorded their harvests, priests wrote hymns to the gods, kings proclaimed their laws, and storytellers composed epics that still speak to us today. Without Mesopotamia's clay tablets, history would remain only as whispers and forgotten tales. Instead, these wedge-shaped marks created permanence. They gave humanity the ability to share knowledge across generations, to pass down ideas, and to build upon the wisdom of the past. In truth, every book, every contract, every poem written today traces its bloodline back to those first inscriptions in Mesopotamia. Law 2 was born here. The Code of Hammurabi, inscribed upon a tall basalt stele over 3,700 years ago, declared that justice was no longer the whim of the powerful alone. For the first time in human history, there were rules that governed society, rules written for all to see. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth may sound harsh to modern ears, but in its time it was revolutionary. It restrained vengeance, demanded fairness, and gave shape to the idea of accountability. Even today, the principles of law, equality, and civic duty carry the fingerprints of Hammurabi's Babylon. Beyond writing and law, Mesopotamia gave us the blueprint for the city itself. Streets laid out, markets buzzing with trade, temples towering above, and walls protecting the inhabitants within. Cities were no longer just clusters of homes. They became engines of culture, governance, and innovation. The ziggurats that pierced the skies were not merely temples, but symbols of human ambition to connect with the divine, to climb higher than ever before. In these crowded urban centers, humanity learned to live together, to compromise, to innovate, and to imagine futures beyond the horizon. When we look at our own world today, our cities, our laws, our libraries, our government sit is impossible not to see the shadow of Mesopotamia stretching across time. This land did not simply host history, it invented it. The wheel, the calendar, mathematics, irrigation, countless breakthroughs began here, echoing outward across continents and centuries. To call Mesopotamia the cradle of civilization is no exaggeration, is the very womb from which human society was born. And though the rivers that once nourished these first cities have changed their courses, and the ruins lie silent beneath the sands, their legacy still breathes in every written word, every courtroom, every bustling metropolis. On earth, when night descended upon the cities of Mesopotamia, the sky became a canvas of mystery. To the priests and astronomers who climbed the steps of ziggurats, the heavens were not just beautiful, they were a language waiting to be read. They mapped the stars, tracked the moon, and followed the movements of planets with astonishing precision. From these observations came the world's first calendars, dividing time into months, weeks, and days. They learned to predict floods, seasons, and eclipses. To live in Mesopotamia was to understand that survival depended not just on the earth beneath your feet, but on the skies above your head. Every modern calendar we follow, every moment we measure, is the echo of Mesopotamian stargazing thousands of years ago. Mathematics, too, was their gift. Long before Greece, long before Rome, Mesopotamians devised systems of numbers that shaped trade, architecture, and astronomy. They used a sexagesimal system based on the number 60 that still survives today in our 60-minute hours and 360-degree circles. Imagine the brilliance. Thousands of years ago, scribes etched multiplication tables into clay, solved quadratic equations, and measured land with geometric precision. Farmers divided fields, merchants calculated trade, builders constructed temples, and astronomers charted the heavens, all with mathematics born here. Without Mesopotamia's numbers, humanity's ability to measure and build would have remained trapped in shadows. Yet, Mesopotamia was not only the birthplace of science, was also the realm of faith and myth. The gods of this land were many, and their stories shaped how people understood life, death, and destiny. Anu, the sky god, and Lil, the lord of the air. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. These deities reflected both the beauty and brutality of existence. Their myths were not just tales for entertainment, but explanations for the mysteries of life. Why the rivers flooded, why drought came, why kings rose and fell. Even the story of a great flood, told in the Epic of Gilgamesh, would echo centuries later in the scriptures of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Mesopotamian myths, etched into clay, became seeds of the world's great religions. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's first great work of literature, remains one of humanity's most powerful inheritances. In its verses, we find friendship, grief, the search for immortality, and the acceptance of mortality. Gilgamesh, the mighty king of Uruk, journeys across deserts and seas, confronts gods and monsters, and finally learns that true immortality lies not in endless life, but in the legacy one leaves behind. Even today, the epic's haunting beauty speaks to us with a familiarity that defies its age. It reminds us that though millennia separate us from Mesopotamia, the human heart has always longed for meaning, for love, and for eternity. From numbers to myths, from stars to scriptures, Mesopotamia's legacy is a tapestry of both reason and faith. It is the paradox of humanity itself, the quest to measure the cosmos with precision, while simultaneously bowing to the mysteries that cannot be explained. Our sciences, our philosophies, our religions, all of them carry echoes of the first questions asked beneath Mesopotamian skies. The clay tablets may crumble, the temples may fall, but the ideas born here endure. As eternal as the stars, these ancient dreamers once charted. Civilizations rise and fall, yet some never truly vanish. Mesopotamia's ruins may lie silent beneath the sands of Iraq, but its soul continues to live within us. Every time we write a word, calculate a number, or follow a law, we are walking in the footsteps of the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. The cradle of civilization was not merely a place in time, it was a turning point in human history, a dawn that made all other dawns possible. To speak of Mesopotamia is to speak of the roots of humanity itself. Consider the simple act of writing. The scratch of pen on paper, the click of keys on a keyboard, the glowing text on a phone screen, all of it is the echo of cuneiform pressed into clay 4,000 years ago. Law courts that dispense justice, libraries that preserve knowledge, schools that teach, farms that irrigate their crops, cities that govern their people, these are not just modern inventions. They are Mesopotamian dreams carried forward across centuries. Humanity owes its very structure of life to this land between rivers. Even the struggles of Mesopotamia tell a timeless story. Empires rose here, and empires fell. Wars scarred the land, but still, life returned. Palaces crumbled, but villages endured. Dynasties collapsed, but families rebuilt. That rhythm of destruction and rebirth has continued into Iraq's modern era. And perhaps this is Mesopotamia's truest lesson, that even in the face of endless hardship, human resilience is unbreakable. No conqueror, no drought, no calamity could silence the people of this land for long. Today, the ruins of Babylon stand as silent witnesses. Tourists walk among the bricks where kings once ruled. Archaeologists uncover tablets, tools, and idols that slept beneath the soil for thousands of years. Each discovery is not just a relic, it is a voice speaking across time, reminding us that we are part of a story far older than we imagine. When the winds whistle through the stones of yore, when the sun sets over the Euphrates, one can almost hear the whispers of the past calling out, "Remember us. Do not forget where it all began." And so, the legacy of Mesopotamia is not confined to Iraq alone, belongs to the world. It belongs to every child learning to read, every farmer sowing his field, every dreamer gazing at the stars. It is proof that even in the harshest of landscapes, human beings can build wonders, create beauty, and seek truth. The cradle of civilization is not dead. It beats within our very existence. And as long as humanity endures, so too will the eternal legacy of Mesopotamia, from the first cities to the first laws. From the birth of writing to the rise of empires, Mesopotamia gave humanity its beginning. Its spirit still flows through every word we write, every dream we build. And this is not just the past. It is our legacy. You've been watching Historic Horizon TV. Until next time, let history inspire the future.